Hi, welcome to my presentation of my leadership position interview for St. Mary's EDMA 632 Ethics and Law. My name is Claire Van Seth. The person that I chose to interview is Heather Nyseth. She's the secondary ELL lead teacher at Independent School District 196. So according to Ms. Nyseth, the biggest issue in education today is equity, and specifically equity in education. She further elaborated what she meant by this. What she means is that it's essential that teachers are preparing with culturally responsive and linguistic teaching strategies. So linguistic teaching strategies would include things like building academic vocabulary, using sentence starters to build academic language, and when necessary, using first language supports. Next, she elaborated that teachers should be aware of inequities that are happening and be able to meet the needs of students who might experience inequities. So this spring, one of the biggest inequities that we were experiencing is inadequate access to home internet and technology. So we were working with students and their families to figure out how they could access the internet. And a lot of them requested hotspots, which in our district, we provide high schoolers, any high schoolers who ask for them, with hotspots, but they have to request them. However, this became many districts' policies, and there was a huge back order of hotspots. So it took a while for us to get all of our students reliable internet access. Right now, students who lack hotspots get put on a waiting list, and whenever the next hotspot comes in, they're able to issue that student a hotspot. The turnaround time currently is about 1 week. So if you think about that, it doesn't seem like that much, but if a student doesn't have internet for a whole week, they are a whole week behind in all 7 classes. Teachers understanding that is really essential to making sure students are successful in their classes. Lastly, Heather elaborated to have strategies to work with all students and their families. So a lot of the ones that I suggest are using the language line. That's what we use to make a phone call to families. If you text with families, Talking Points is a great app because when it sends a text automatically in another language. And then finally, connecting with your district's cultural family advocates. So these are people who work with different communities in order to advocate for students. So really knowing who those people are and what your resources are for collaborating with all families. Later, Heather offered several strategies for how to address the issue of equity in education. First, she suggested being familiar with different cultures. Now, I know trying new foods and celebrating holidays is always fun, but Heather meant going beyond this, beyond sort of the superficial, and really finding out what our families value. For example, do families value shaking hands? Some of my African families have the arm in their other hand when they shake the arm. Others aren't comfortable shaking hands. So really understanding, for example, the different kinds of greetings and then the values of the culture is really essential to understanding all of our families. And on a personal level, I've been working on expanding my reading collection in order to learn about different perspectives. Heather also suggested that teachers know how these cultures function. So in a lot of my classes at home, it's typical for families to loudly talk over each other all the time. And so in my classroom, I have a lot of loud learners because that's also how they learn. So I'm always in a classroom with a door in case we get too loud, so that we don't disrupt some of the other students, because we do have some open concept classrooms at my school. And Ms. Nyseth also stated that there are different ways of learning for students from different cultures to differentiate cultural versus student needs. So, for example, one day I had a student who came back from lunch and hadn't eaten. And when I asked her why she hadn't eaten, she said she didn't like the school lunch. So when I investigated further, I found out it was because she simply doesn't like pizza, and pizza was what was for lunch. Um, it wasn't that she wasn't eating pizza because, for example, there wasn't a meatless option, which a lot of our students need for religious reasons. So understanding I'm not eating because of religious reasons or because I just really didn't like the entree that day. Some other strategies Heather suggested are to learn about culturally responsive learning strategies. She specifically mentioned Cherokee Hawley and his book that includes Pedagogy Management, Building Academic Language and Literacy. She also talked about how learning about how culturally responsive teaching and the brain are intertwined. And with this, she mentions Zaretta Hammond's book, which is about building awareness and knowledge, building learning partnerships, and building intellective capacity. Finally, she said teachers need to build up their toolboxes. So some culturally responsive strategies included in these books would be things like TPR, or total physical response, which includes movement and repetition, using KWL charts to build background knowledge, and storytelling, since a lot of our students come from oral traditions. Some other strategies she suggested are getting students to interact. So that means making a connection and learning what you can about your students, including how to say their complete name correctly. Ms. Nyseth also said to make sure cultures are represented in ways of learning in everything they do. So for me, this really means providing student choice. For example, if we're doing a discussion on Schoology, which is our online learning platform, I typically click the settings where students can provide a written or oral response. So then they can make the choice as to how they best would respond to that. She, of course, said make sure all students feel welcome. And finally, to understand the barriers that students may have as they enter the classroom. So when I thought about this, I thought about how schools could build trust between the school and some of our minority communities. I've worked with some African American and Native American families who really need that trust built between them and the schools. So this is another really important step to take. So what were my thoughts? What were my takeaways? Professionally, as an ELL teacher, these are all issues and strategies that I think about and work with on a daily basis. So it was really nice to connect with someone and to learn more from someone in a leadership role that really has a lot of the same backgrounds, very similar students, and figure out how we can best support them. On a personal level, I love learning about different cultures. For example, last year I had my first student from Tajikistan, so this summer I bought a book on Central Asian history and I learned a lot. And then I also like learning different languages as well as practicing my own Spanish language skills. How does this connect to our book about ethics in education? Well, one quote that really stood out to me was on page 102. And Stoican Soltis said, "We need a view of social justice that gives people a fair chance to pursue their own conception for their own good without rigging the game to prefer the interests of some over others. So this quote really spoke to me about the ethics of equity in education, about why it's important that we make sure that educational opportunities are equitable for all students. So thank you so much for listening to my presentations. I look forward to your comments and questions, and I look forward to learning from all of you.